Well, g'day. It appears it's finally opened up. That took a while. I might have to close a few tabs and stuff down actually. That one especially. And that one especially also. That might speed things up. So welcome to my channel. Oh, I've already got a thumbs up. G'day. How the hell did that happen? That's very strange. So there is this bloke, Professor Dave. I'll get to him in a second. I'm already distracted. Just because I saw a message come up from Phuket. Where there you go, Phuket. Cheers, bro. Inspired and inspiring, mate. Much appreciated. Oh, and there's another pop-up as well. Anyway, so this bloke, I'm doing it on this device because it's bigger. This one, by this bloke, Professor Dave explains, and he says 10 things that all flat earthers say. And because I left a comment there, I'm actually going to start with the comment, and then I don't really need glasses for up close work like this. So I guess I didn't start on the nicest note imaginable, but I was honest. And I think sometimes it's better to be brutally honest than it is to merely just attack somebody with not honest feelings that come from the heart. So I said, "You're a moron, mate." Straight to the point. Everything you said I can debunk. Gravity is not a force. Resistance is a force. And that is a fact. Hence why I've already made part 1. But I'm going to go through the entire video anyway, bit by bit, and we'll get there. So anyway, I'm still going to read the comment because it sort of gets quite funny. Buoyancy is therefore resistant force. Things drop because of lack of resistance. Remove the air altogether, as in the vacuum, and even the feather falls with the same lack of resistance until hitting the ground, which resists it. You're actually very boring, and I've lost interest in debunking the rest, all of which has been done 1,000 times before. So yeah, I did get a bit bored there. Not a single thumbs up, can you believe that? Anyway, Ryan Trevitt comes along and says, no points. But I made a point. Resistant force, what are you talking about? Tom Servo says, flat earthers are mentally ill. Well, that got 3 likes. The other one only got 1. So us being mentally ill is more likable to the Globehead community than not scoring points. Even though I made points. Professor Dave comes along and he says, resistance is a force. He puts that forth as a question. Congratulations, you have made it into the Hall of Fame of the dumbest things that flat earthers say. I'm amazed you are able to operate a keyboard. Why would you be amazed about that, mate? Keyboards are pretty easy to operate. You just press the buttons which have a resistant force and pop back up because they've got springs inside of them. That's what resistant forces do. G'day, PCAT Word. How you doing, bro? Nick? Good to see you, mate. Cheers for your comment there. I just saw that a moment ago. So we've got this Professor Dave explains saying that resistance is not a force, and that by me saying it is a force, I've made it into the Hall of Fame of the dumbest things that flat earthers say. All right, I'm in the Hall of Fame now. Great stuff. So I responded to him at Professor Dave Explains. I was actually making a video response in the first place before your annoying voice got so much to me, repeating the dumbest things over and over. The 8 inches per mile squared does actually check out too, by the way. Yes, resistance is a force, and for you to question only goes to prove why you're a fantasy ball believer in the first place. It's only a matter of time before such a belief will have you believers declared clinically insane. Water droplets. Laugh my ass off. You were so wrong in every way. Maybe I will make that video after all. Here we are. If only you weren't such an annoying prat to listen to. A person who has a strip of bacon as his avatar and says, or goes by the name, live bacon. I don't know if it means a live bacon or a live bacon. I think we'll go with a live bacon. Makes a comment and it's got a like. And he says, I like chicken. Bit kinky if you ask me, but anyway, that's what he's into. Professor Dave then comes along and says, I kid you not, this is the professor science guy who made this video. Chicken noodle soup is a force. A dandelion is a force. Your mom is a force. I don't even have a mom. She's a mum, mate. Get it right. Ooh, this game is fun. And Alive Bacon comes back again and says, balanced as all things should be. And so I just did have to respond to Professor Dave explains, sorry, mate, but going full retard doesn't help your case. I only got so far as making part 1, still uploading now. I really don't think I can handle so much stupid in such a short amount of time. It literally oozes out of you every time you open your mouth, and my tolerance levels are unfortunately low at the moment. I'll try again later. And here I am, later, trying again, and I'll proceed momentarily. But Mr. Sponge Joe, these people have the greatest names, don't they? The Earthers are getting dumber. I didn't think that was possible. Oh, that's cute. So anyway, without any further ado, let's see if we can open up the actual video. Oh, no, that didn't work. We'll have to do it another way. Find his comment again. There it is, Professor Dave. Hopefully this will open up actual video. There we go. Alrighty. And maybe it will even go sideways.
So the start of the game is pretty easy. You gotta build a city hall, a couple mines,
it's got ads.
One of each. And of course, you're gonna need a barracks. That's a
Get rid
standard
of the ads on every other device I have.
Hey everyone, so some of you may be aware of my recent foray into the Flat Earth community, most notably with this lengthy response to the Globe Busters. For about 2 months now, the comments section of that video has been a consistent hotbed of activity, with hundreds of Flat Earthers stopping by to share their opinions. For people who claim that globe tards just repeat what they were told in school, you guys sure do all say the exact same things. And I don't just mean the same arguments. I mean the same things word for word, like they were copied and pasted from some
Well, that's because once the truth becomes the truth,
you all watch the same
you can
ridiculous
express
YouTube
it the
videos
same way as the
made by the
truth
same
always
handful
was.
of con men, and you all quote them verbatim without applying a shred of critical thinking.
Bullshit.
So now that I am intimately familiar with your greatest hits, I just had to make one more video so that I could share the 10 things that all Flat Earthers say. If you're a regular person and you haven't seen my other 2 Flat Earth videos, you may want to check those out.
I love that. Are you a regular person? Well, yeah. As I already said on the previous one, yep, I'm regular. I poop every morning, have a coffee, and then I do another one. It's pretty down regular. What do you mean? Do you mean like a regular indoctrinated person who thinks the way that you're told to by your masters? I think that's what you're really referring to.
First, for a little bit of context. But if you're a Flat Earther yourself, don't bother. I'll be speaking directly to you throughout this video. Let's begin.
Sure.
Number 1 extremely problematic side effect of taking the globe and flattening it out into a plane is that gravity makes no sense, and there is no reason for things to fall to the ground.
That is exactly right, mate. That's why I've already responded to that one in the earlier part 1 to say that Flat Earthers don't take the globe and flatten it out. Now, what you've done is you've taken the flat plane and you've globularized it, and you've invented this theory of gravity being attracted towards the center of mass, and therefore you still believe it must apply when you come back to reality and understand reality as it always was in the first place, is that we don't need an attractive force pulling us towards the center if you're not on the outside surface of a spinning ball in a vacuum of space in the first place, which that's the only reason you needed to invent gravity, to explain away this absurd theory, because you didn't understand why things disappearing over the convergence point of the horizon, which is always at eye level, you think it's going over a curve. So therefore, you back-engineered everything to fit that idea, because ancient superstitious people thought boats disappeared over curvature because they didn't understand perspective, convergence, viewable distance. We now have optical equipment where we can see much, much further. The average person can see much further. A telescope is something a lot of people have in their garage or their basement, or something they might even pull out of their attic once in a while and go and look at some stars and think that they're being scientific. You're just magnifying the view of what's there. That's what happens when you look into the distance at the horizon. You're magnifying what's there. You will not see beyond the convergence point because that is the limits of perspective due to your actual height. So the whole globe is back engineered on that very concept in the first place. Let's see what else you have to say.
All objects accelerate towards the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared. That's an indisputable fact. And it is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. This is how cars drive,
not actually
planes fly,
true.
people walk.
In a sense, you're correct. There has to be some force to pick it up in the first place. Like, for example, a tree can slowly pick something up by the methods of drawing stuff up through its whole root system and its circulatory system and growing fruit, and eventually that fruit will become too heavy for the branch to hold it, and it will drop because the medium of air is insufficient to support it, to give it buoyancy. That's all it really is. If it didn't pick it up in the first place, it would stay in the ground at rest, pretty much as the first law of Newton says, an object at rest remains at rest unless acted upon by another force. So when we're talking about something dropping, if you didn't apply the force to pick it up or kick it up or shoot it up or whatever upward force you applied to it, it wouldn't find its way of losing any momentum, air resistance, and then dropping back down because air has so little resistance. And that's all it is. As I mentioned from the start, resistant force is the only force. If it's got no resistance, it will keep taking the path of least resistance to a place of more resistance. And that's why we put the part and buoyancy into the equation of density and buoyancy. If it's more dense, it will displace the less dense medium until it comes to a place of sufficient density to give it buoyancy. Less buoyant air above does not give that. It's more resistant if it has a mass in the air to drop. That's why it goes down. Simple as that. Amen, bro. Some people get it. Some people you have to explain it 100 times and they still won't get it. They'll still say, but why down? Because less buoyant air offers less buoyant force, less dense air. It's so simple, it's not funny.
Cats jump. It's how literally all motion works. Even charlatans like the Globe Busters accept at least this much, which is why they go off on their rants about magnetic magic, as you may have seen in my previous video. But quite comically, most flat earthers don't even do this. Most of you address this problem by simply listing two words: density and buoyancy.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but these are not forces. Forces are vectors.
True.
They have a magnitude, which means a numerical amount, and a direction, which means they have to point somewhere. Density is simply mass per unit volume, or how much matter sits in a particular space. It doesn't point anywhere.
Correct. You got that.
Buoyancy is simply a measurement of an object's tendency to float.
Force.
So allow me to repeat.
Resistant force is a force.
Not
buoyant
forces.
Force is
this
a
is
force.
trivial to prove. You say that objects fall down because they are more dense than the air below them.
Mm-hmm.
Why down? Why not up?
Because it doesn't offer buoyancy or resistance.
When you let go of a ball, there is air all around it. How does it know to fall down? Also, objects fall down when they are in a vacuum, which means there is no air below them.
Oh, gee, this guy's a freaking Einstein, isn't he?
Things accelerate down towards the ground because of a downward force.
No, because of the lack of resistance. Air has very, very little resistance. A vacuum has even less. It has zero resistance, hence why it's a vacuum. That's why a feather, it is resisted slightly by air. That's why it will flutter as it falls, because of air resistance. But when you remove the air altogether, it drops the same rate as the bowling ball. That is not attraction of mass. That is not proof of a force. The force was lifting them in the first place, dropping them with no resistance until finding a place of resistance. How hard is that to understand? Surely not difficult.
That force is gravity, which pulls everything towards the center of the Earth, which is its center of mass. Denser things displace less dense things because gravity exists.
No, because of their mass.
Greater gravitational attraction.
Mm-hmm.
This is clearly why things that are less dense than water float on water. Again, because gravity.
It doesn't need the invisible force, the invention of gravity. It just does it because of its mass. Its mass is technically the force displacing something of less mass because it has greater mass, greater density. It's pretty well straightforward without the need to bring in your invisible forces, your beliefs. G'day, Matt. Welcome, mate. Didn't end up going to bowls after all. I was meant to say that in my introduction. The weather turned shit, and I decided to sit here and do this insists.
Rocks are pulled down harder than water, which is pulled down harder than air. Some of your more popular retorts to this include wondering how oceans stay on the earth while birds and insects can fly.
This is
it's because birds and insects have wings. They flap them and generate an upward force. If that force exceeds the gravitational force, they go up.
Well,
Oceans
actually,
can't do this because ocean.
Let's just stop that there for a second. And that's not necessarily 100% true. You can actually spread your wings, and if you've got a strong enough wind, that will also create lift. It's the shape of the wings themselves that create the lift. It's the resistant force against the wind. That's why, as you will go into in a moment to explain why planes fly, because they use thrust to gain the lift under the wings, which have the resistant force. It's pretty straightforward sort of stuff. It's one of my favorite things to sort of muck around with, the idea of having free flight by using vortex energy. I get a couple of comments here. I might read them because they'll be more interesting than giving this Professor Dave Explains a hard time. And all done in containers. Is that to do with the water? I'm not sure. Birds spread their density across a larger volume. Well, yeah, they've got the two things. They're lightweight. They've got the feathers, which create the resistant force, which gives them the lift. And that's why some birds, especially the big ones, can soar for hours and hours. They're also riding thermal currents because heat rises, so that gives them lift as well. But generally speaking, they don't need to have heat and thermal currents necessarily, except at the end of the day, that's pretty much what wind is all about. It is thermal currents, so that's what wind does. But yeah, technically in a wind tunnel, you could have a model of a bird, say, or a model of an aeroplane, and if you threw the wind down the tunnel fast enough, it would gain lift. It's pretty much the opposite of what the turbines are doing by thrusting through the air to create lift a different way. It's still creating motion and lift by the shape of the wings. So to say that the birds fly because they flap their wings isn't necessarily 100% true. It's just a small part of the equation of flight. Oceans do not have wings, is what he says next. Like us, you can't make this stuff up. Oceans do not have wings. No, but they have what we call density. They have mass, and their own mass, that's the nature of a liquid, is to congregate as one with other bits of liquid, which therefore then spreads out across the surface until it's contained by higher edges. Now, when you hold a globe in your hands, you are imagining there's an empty jar. Let's imagine this is a globe, and you're holding China and America, and you've got this massive, thousands of miles high curve of water. In reality, there's no way that water would just curve because it's attracted to the center of mass. We see, observe, and know that water wants to flatten out, to be level. That's why we use a spirit level in building to create flat, level brick lines. And we use a plumb bob, which is directly perpendicular. You don't see any tall building, no matter how big it was, like the World Trade Center buildings, for example, would have been a great example because they're big square buildings. You don't see the two plumb lines from different parts pointing towards the center of the earth and making the buildings wider at the top. You know, on a globe Earth, there would be a detectable amount of measurable difference in such a tall building. Never been detected, never been accounted for, and never is. So, yeah, oceans do not have wings.
Don't have wings. Individual water molecules can evaporate and go up into the sky because they are so tiny.
Yeah,
but when they get up to where it is colder and accumulate into clouds, they eventually condense back into liquid water. And guess what happens? They fall back down as rain. Hopefully you are familiar with rain.
Become
As
more
for
dense.
planes and other macroscopic objects, again, they go up only when a force is applied. When you throw a ball up into the sky, the force imparted on the ball by your arm is greater than the gravitational force. But as soon as it leaves your hand, no more force is being applied, and only the gravitational force is acting upon the ball. So that velocity gets smaller and smaller. It's zero.
Wrong. There's no gravitational force being applied. It is air resistance. Air has some amount of resistance, and it has no buoyant force. So when something's going up, it's slowly getting resisted by the air itself until eventually it says, okay, I've had enough of this. And then because there is no resistant force sufficient to give it buoyancy, it drops back down again through the path of least resistance, which just because air gets thinner higher up does not for 1 second mean that it should keep going up because it's less resistant up there. It's the total in totality. Like the ball is still more dense than all of that air combined. And if that air is insufficient to give it buoyancy, it keeps dropping until what? It reaches the ground, which is of sufficient resistance to arrest it, to stop it, to bring it to rest. If it falls in the water, it may float. It becomes buoyant because the water is sufficient to resist it. The air is not. There's no gravity needed. It's just an invention. It's a deluded, nonsensical concept that isn't necessary in reality at all.
Zero, at which point it starts to fall, and it falls faster and faster until it hits the ground. Gravity. Gravity exists, period. Saying it is just a theory does nothing but display that you have no idea what a theory is. Stop repeating what you hear on flat earth videos and catch up to the 17th century.
No, I'm not saying it's just a theory, mate. I'm saying it's a belief. It's a fantasy. It's a conjured up concept that you require to have your spinning ball model work. Reality doesn't require it. So we can explain normal natural physics with normal natural physics, which we actually do. All equations are done considering a stationary flat Earth. Yep, I did enough engineering science back in the day to know that that's part of each and every formula. And if you look at the NASA papers that are often published to do with flight, they all say the same thing. It is assumed a non-rotating planar Earth. Why? Because that's what reality requires. Flight would actually be impossible on the spinning ball if you could actually apply some logic. That was one of the first things they thought of back in the day when they invented flight, is how we're going to take into account the spin of the Earth. And it turns out, well, they didn't have to. And I wonder why that is. Probably because it doesn't exist, except in fantasies and in textbooks and in people's insane minds. In the sane mind, we just observe reality as it is, without spin, without made-up forces, without any sort of pseudoscientific nonsense, nonsensical theories. We just observe reality. It's quite simple. You should try it.
2. Flat earthers all say, I shouldn't see this thing, but I do, so the earth is flat. Then to justify this claim, you all say the same thing, typically with no context whatsoever. 8 inches per mile squared. None of you have any idea what this means. You can't derive it. You can't calculate anything with it.
Yes,
you can't make a prediction with it.
Yeah,
you can't tell me anything about this value at all.
You
when
can.
I point this out to you, you get very angry.
25,000 miles.
Of answering simple questions, you just link me to a bunch of videos made by con men. Well, I'm sorry, friends. Those people are doing incorrect math, or lying, or both, and they are counting on the fact that you won't do any math at all to check up on them. 8 inches per mile squared is not a valid way to measure Earth's curvature. If you understood math, you would immediately see that this squared on miles is totally out of place. That's because
talks about it making a parabola, of course. Well, we know that if you continue to do that, that's what any formula will do, because you've got to take into account it curves back underneath itself. But for all intents and purposes, if you're measuring a ball at 25,000 miles circumference, 8 inches per mile squared is 100%. Okay, 7.98 inches per mile squared is 100% correct. way of doing it. So we actually go into another formula to try and complicate it even more so that then the average person can understand it even less. Now, when they start going into all their cosine and so forth sort of things, this is what alchemists do. They hide their secrets in formulas that the average person cannot understand. Whereas if it's not simple and logical and explainable to the common man, it's probably full of shit. And that's basically what his formula is going to end up being. 8 inches per mile squared is 100% effective for at least enough distance that you could possibly imagine to be able to even see on wherever you might be living. In reality, though, if you kept on going outwards across this so-called curvature, you will just see it keeps on going and going and going, as pilots always do see. Never account for this curvature. It is 100% correct formula, and if you're going 500 miles per hour, that is a huge amount of curvature they would be adjusting for every moment going down, around, over a curve, if it in fact existed. Now, I know they say it's 8 inches per mile, and so you think, well, every mile you're going, it's only 8 inches. It's very little amount. You wouldn't notice that. It's like, they call it 0.004 degrees per mile or something crazy like that. But the thing is, when you're going 500 miles per hour, at 90 miles, there's an entire mile of drop. That's the one figure I always remember. At 90 miles, there's a mile of drop. That is 2 of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, barely half a mile tall. 2 of those, one on top of the other, that's how much drop exists at 90 miles. So you're going 500 miles per hour. That means you're not just going a mile drop for every 90 miles, it gets bigger, more and more exponential as you go. You're going 2 Burj Khalifas every 10 minutes. That's how much drop should be existing. You never account for it. So that is why it is a correct formula, and that is why you refute it, because we know it doesn't exist in reality. And gravity suddenly becomes so strong that it pulls aircraft around. Well, yeah, there is one way of rationalizing that, which I will agree with, and that is that the plane is only using enough thrust to stay the same height the whole time. So it is constantly dropping as it's doing that. You could argue it that way, but the Globeheads don't even think of that one. I don't think of that one for them. But obviously, 2 Burj Khalifas every 10 minutes of drop, sorry, no. There's no curve. And it would be very, very, very apparent and would not just magically vanish the higher up you got. So let's go do his
parabolic approximation. This is for doing calculations with a parabola. It's possible that you remember this shape from middle school algebra, but I wouldn't be surprised if you don't. As you can see, the Earth is not shaped like this. So where does it come from, and why do people use it? It comes from the Flat Earth Bible, Zetetic astronomy, and Flat Earth priests use it because they know it's not accurate. It gives them incorrect values that they can use to claim that they shouldn't be able to see something when in fact they totally should. There are dozens of videos on YouTube demonstrating this, several of which reference the actual formula that actually describes Earth's curvature, which as you can see requires trigonometry. Stop blindly repeating what you hear on Flat Earth videos and learn some basic math so that you can do these calculations for yourself.
Well, you don't even have to learn those complicated formulas. Use your electronic calculator to do it, because nobody can work that shit out in their heads anyway. You can just plug your things into an Earth calculator. There are plenty of Earth calculators around which will show you how much should be hidden. And that's what they say. That's what the formula strictly says, that at 90 miles, there's an entire mile of drop. That's how much should be hidden from you. So your viewing height doesn't really give you that much greater advantage. If you're looking over a curve, it's still just a tangent line into a point in the distance. But getting higher is actually going further away on your curve. It's not actually going over that curve to see over it. Okay, so anytime you're going up, you're actually going away away from the center. That's what up means on your ball. So getting greater height doesn't really give as much greater viewing distance as you would expect. except if you're going up above a flat surface. And of course it does. It gives you distinctly greater advantage to see further. And that is why you can send a drone up to watch the sunset multiple times when the sun is just receding in the distance and being obscured because of this convergence point, which is always rising up to the center of your field of view. That's just how convergence and perspective works in reality. So the whole globe gets back engineered on that, saying that, oh, well, if something at 3 miles distance from 6 foot of height is going over the curve, and that's how we can calculate how big the world is. And that's what globe world calculations are based on. Convergence point, misinterpretation of perspective.
Number 3, all flat earthers say the same two things about water. The first is water doesn't curve, and the second is water finds its own level. The second phrase is completely meaningless, so the fact that you all say that exact thing verbatim is just one of the many demonstrations that you all blindly repeat what you hear without giving it a moment's thought.
Oh, come on. Just do this. Do yourself a little favor. Open up your Google or whatever search engine, whatever dictionary you prefer to look up, and look up the definition of level. Now, it does have multiple meanings, of course, being on the level, but multiple times the word flat does come up. Do the reverse. Look up the definition of flat. Flat and level are synonymous. They are 100% the same thing. Globeheads are always trying to talk their way out of that one and saying, well, something can be flat but not level. That is true. Like a shelf can be completely upright, flat, but not being level. But that is why we use a spirit level to ensure it is level. And that is exactly what water is doing by its own nature, by its own design. It has no choice but to seek and find its level. Except he's going to come to a moment here and show water droplets, and this will be quite funny. It is. It's all a matter of interpretation. You can look at the same facts and interpret it completely differently according to your preconceived biases. If you want to prove it to be a ball, you'll find a reason to make it prove a ball. If you understand it's flat and stationary, you'll find a way to explain how that works on the flat and stationary world we live upon.
First phrase, stating that water doesn't curve, is at least a coherent thought. However, it is dead wrong. Put a drop of water on a piece of wax paper or a leaf. What does it look like? A freaking sphere. Isn't that something? In your haste to mindlessly parrot.
Wow. So tiny little droplets, which we know water has surface tension on a small scale. Just try one little thing like we'd see out in nature. Well, first of all, we'd put like 10 or 20 drops together, or 10 or 20, 100,000 together and blow on them. What happens to your surface tension? Once it's disturbed, bam, you're talking about something on a very tiny, small molecular level that has nothing to do with reality at the scale it exists at, and yet it is infuriating. I agree, Phuket. Absolutely. It's just insane that they still will go to this to say that water will form a sphere naturally left to its own devices. No. A droplet doesn't form a sphere. By taking the path of least resistance, it actually forms something more akin to the shape of an egg, but more of a pointy tail on it, really, like a teardrop. That's what we see. That's what a raindrop actually looks like. It's not a sphere at all. It's trailing off behind it, but it's also clinging together as much as possible. And depending on the rate of fall and the density of the raindrop and everything, could change many other variables as well, but it is not forming a sphere. Nothing naturally forms a sphere. If a sphere was the most natural shape for things to take, then every time you went to a river full of rocks all tumbling around and getting polished all the time, each and every one of them would be more or less a sphere. And yet, try as you might, you'll be lucky if you can find even one out of 10,000 that's even close to being perfectly spherical. They'll all be oblate and all sorts of different weird shapes, but you will not find perfect spheres in nature. So looking at lights in the sky does not prove you're looking at perfect spheres.
you heard from flat earth priests about water, you forgot to look at water.
No,
water curves, my friends. Look at this curved meniscus. Look at these waves. Water curves all the time. Water is not
flowing
magic.
Water.
It is subject to influence by external forces, just like all other matter. With a spherical water droplet.
As somebody who spent many years out surfing, I can tell you that that wave is a very momentarily time that briefly passes as the water is seeking its level, because it comes out from a deep place where it's been greatly agitated by big winds, and then it reaches a shallow place, and the shore gets shallower and shallower, and a sandbar appears. The wave then, seeking its level, will curl over and form very momentarily, instantly try to seek its own level again, and as a result, it often will produce a rip, which, as the water itself is naturally finding its own level again, which people can quite easily drown in. Fortunately, myself, one of my first jobs after high school, after working as a pharmacy assistant for my parents, I worked as a professional lifeguard, a beach inspector. That was my job, employed by the Great Lakes Shire Council down in Port Stephens. And so every day, this is what I'd be doing, was studying the rips and apart from the fact I did it anyway as a surfer, I also had to be collecting data for them, showing where the rips were, where we put the flags, why we put the flags there, and all the rest. So I'm understanding the way water naturally works. In reality, proves that we know what we're talking about when we say that water is always seeking its level. Now, because we do have the influence of the tides, which I'd say is the moon pushing the tides ahead of it, not pulling in any way, shape, or form, then it's also still seeking its level as it's constantly checking and balancing itself the whole time. 2 tides a day, 1 moon, 1 mass. How can 1 mass pull water around the entire planet, or say planet? How can it pull it around the entire globe twice a day when it's only got the 1 mass, which never changes? And yet when we've got a full moon, we get higher tides, we get bigger king tides. Again, that's when the sun and moon are opposite one another, not working together. And yet it's said that gravity is what holds Earth in orbit around the sun. Therefore, the moon would be pulling the opposite direction, not creating bigger tides. Would be when the moon and sun are pulling together, you'd get your bigger tides, your king tides. So it would only happen on the new moon, but that isn't the case. The king tides always happen on a full moon, especially around near the equinoxes, being that the sun itself has some influence, and then at the equinox, that's when it's at the most equal distant point above the equator, in balance and harmony with the moon, which has an even greater influence on the oceans, which are somehow involved in what keeps the both of them aloft in the first place. I don't know exactly how it works, but some sort of electromagnetic force with the salt water, and as a result, it pushes down on salt water as it moves around. So tides aren't even explained by globes in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. Not as you know it, Captain, it forms a circle, perfect or not, it forms circles. Or bubbles, I suppose. That would be one good example, but the bigger the bubble, the more flowy and billowy they get. Small bubbles, yeah, okay. So yeah, you might be able to explain craters on the moon bursting as bubbles as the liquid molten material it was made from rapidly cooled. But apart from that, finding spheres naturally occurring in anything but bubbles, which again, that's the very opposite of something solid forming as a sphere, because it's actually the air expanding, equally pressing out upon the surface of whatever it's made of, the liquid usually, creating equal pressure all around it, hence why that will form a sphere or a circle, but you won't find it in anything solid. It's the very opposite. G'day, Michael Gordon. Thanks for dropping in too. So now I've got 5 people all at once. Wow, getting a huge audience going now. Anyway, I'm going to stick to this one. I could talk about many things and get sidetracked 100 times.
That's the electromagnetic force.
Electromagnetic
water molecules
in water
make hydrogen bonds with one another, which in this context we refer to as cohesive forces. That's why water has a very high surface tension, and that's why a water droplet remains spherical, so that it can maximize the number of hydrogen bonds that are formed and keep the system at the lowest energy possible. So clearly and indisputably, water curves. In this example, it is due to the electromagnetic force. It is therefore quite easy to understand that it can curve under the influence of any force, including gravity.
Including your range top.
Oceans conform to the curvature of the Earth just like the land does, and for the same reason.
Water
Finds its own level is absolutely meaningless. You think that level means...
No. That in itself is an absurdity, an absolute absurdity. Because you're also saying there, as you see, the land is curving below the water. Now, that's why it's so absurd. How can you have land beneath water level? It's just, it does your head in every single sense. Now, I understand you're saying it's all being pulled towards the center, but there is still, in our reality, an up and down. You see it with every glass you fill, every bathtub, every lake, anything that holds water, the edges must be higher than the water. So why, in the case of a globe, can the water be higher than the land and not be flooding over the land? It can't. It's as simple as that. The water table is level. The seas are below that amount of land which is above sea level. That is exactly why the rational mind has to come to know and understand that the Earth is flat. There's no other way around it. You simply cannot have land lower than water level and not be flooded. That's just how nature works. Place some water on your range top and it will form many bubbles. Well, that's heat. And that is the gaseous exchange, because in a sense, I know it's not correct, 100% correct to say this, but you can think of it like this, that water is basically air under pressure. Now, I know that's not 100% correct, but it's sort of correct. It's the way it works. When you put water into a vacuum chamber and extract the air, what happens to the water is it boils. It doesn't get hot, it boils. It releases itself back into its gaseous form because there's not enough pressure to hold it together. But under air pressure, under the weight of all that air, one atmosphere, we have our oceans and our lakes and our liquid water because they exist sea level, more or less. Hope that doesn't start making a horrible buzzing noise. I think we did for a moment there. So, yeah, the term boils, we're not normally used to at one atmosphere of pressure. But as we've also shown, like mountaineers who go up multiple thousands of feet, they'll find that they can boil water at lower temperatures, like in the 90 degrees range, rather than the full 100 degrees that you need at sea level air pressure. But once again, don't make that buzz. Once again, you put it in a vacuum chamber, and at 24 degrees room temperature, it will boil. It is just gas, H2O, equalizing with the surrounding pressure. So that is why if we were surrounded by a vacuum in outer space, we could not possibly have an atmosphere. It would dissipate immediately, be gone, and then all our water will boil, dissipate, and be gone, and we would resemble the surface of the moon. Hence, we have to assume the only logical conclusion to that is we are not living surrounded by a vacuum, that we are in a pressurized system. Now, whether or not that means we've got a solid dome over us or another layer of something ice floating above the gases, these things aren't necessarily known or knowable or need to be known. The fact is we know that there is sufficient air pressure to keep water at the safe liquid level that we need it to be for life to continue, and that's pretty much all we really need to know about that. We could go into the dome or firmament if we really had to, but it's not really necessary. You can still have air pressure with or without it, just simply because of the amount of air that's that's there not being sucked off by a big vacuum. And I think he does talk about a vacuum soon, so let's get to that.
It's flat, as though on the globe model, water should just magically project into space at some arbitrary angle. In fact, level just means as close to the center of the Earth as possible. What's most hilarious is that even in the tool called the level, which only works because gravity exists, there is a curved bubble right in there. If the bubble is curved, what is the liquid, which is mostly water, doing around that bubble?
It is allowing it to push against it according to the laws of density and buoyancy to create the most natural shape inside the container. If you broke the bubble, the air would escape and the liquid would leak out. It's like it only works because it's encapsulated. It is enclosed. You've trapped a bubble of air in there. The air, according to its density and buoyancy, seeks the path of least resistance, and that is why when you have it level, it sits between the two lines in the center because you made the bubble of air the right size to fit between those two lines, and that's how you know it's level. It's a really simple tool that's been around for a very long time, and it only works because of density and buoyancy and being in an enclosed system.
It curves. It is absolutely astonishing how the things you repeat from Flat Earth videos are incompatible with even the most trivial everyday observations.
The whole thing's curved,
you should acknowledge that.
It's a tube.
Number 4. You are all quite perplexed about how Earth's atmosphere can exist next to the vacuum of space. This one is rather amusing because what's happening is that since you have no science education, your only context for the word vacuum is a vacuum cleaner. And again, because you have no science education, none of you understand how a vacuum cleaner works, which is a problem because you seem to think that outer space is a vacuum cleaner. Let's take a moment and clear this up. A vacuum is any region where there is no stuff. Here, there is stuff, like air. In space, there is no stuff, or at least very, very close to no stuff. Space is essentially empty. That's a vacuum. It is not a thing that sucks. Vacuums don't suck. Everyone say it with me together. Vacuums don't suck.
All right, let's stop him there for a second. He's got a point. Okay, a vacuum cleaner is not technically a vacuum. It's a vortex of air being sucked through a motor that through a long pipe creates a suction that then runs whatever you want to pick up through a filter, and the clean air gets expelled out the other end while you collect all the dust and whatever rubbish you're cleaning. I kind of know that after spending some amount of my life as a cleaner with multiple different vacuum cleaners and so on. I understand the principle of how a vacuum cleaner works, but a vacuum chamber works on a similar sort of principle in that it is a sealed chamber and then with a valve attached to some sort of pump to suck the air out so that nothing can go back into it. You then create an enclosed environment that has literally nothing in it. That's a vacuum chamber. The moment you release the valve, the air instantly rushes to fill it. So therefore, his entire model that is just shown there of nothing on top of something is so wrong. The air just would want to instantly take the path of least resistance, not the path of most resistance. We know that helium, for example, rises up and it's lighter than air, but air itself is still rising up. And as the Earth is hurtling through space at 67,000 miles per hour, as it's spinning at 1,040 miles per hour, 1.35 times the speed of sound, it's just the spin. It's actually 86 times the speed of sound that it's going around the sun. Let's not even talk about the sun going 514,000 miles per hour through the galaxy as well. The path of least resistance for all that air is to evacuate into the void. We've all seen pictures of the tennis ball spinning, the wet tennis ball. Well, air is less dense than the water. It would just get flung off, giant rooster tail, as we're spinning and speeding through the void of nothing. There's no container. It should be logical to anybody with a thinking mind how that is impossible for nothing to contain everything, all our atmosphere. Like they say, oh, well, we lose some amount of our gases to the vacuum of space. The vacuum doesn't have to suck, even though by definition it would, because it's a void. It's a common understanding that in anything in nature, what's the term again? Abhors a void. Nature abhors a void. It will attempt to fill it if there's nothing there. And the only thing you've got around the earth being nothing and air is the air will fill the nothing before it stays gravity. Gravity. Always gravity. I'll just read a couple of comments here. G'day, Sean. How you doing? So not as you know it, Captain says, have you ever seen something created or dissipated into thin air? If not, I can show you how to make a glass bottle and literally make 90% of it completely disappear using implosion. Well, that would be pretty interesting. I haven't seen that, I must admit. I've seen smoke dissipate into air or gases dissipate because they lessen into the air. Hang on, the peak level has left a comment that needs to be approved. Says, I don't notice Globeheads talking too much crap anymore. They're coming out of the closet. Interesting. My Mercedes is Brayton's here too. How you doing, mate? Or ma'am, sir, madam. I shouldn't be so assuming, should I? More people actually listen to what Ross has to say, they will learn something. Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, I do try to explain things in a way that can be comprehended, because I don't believe in convoluting it in convoluted explanations that go over most people's heads. You know, we have to understand things on the most simple level, because the truth is plain and simple. That's what it boils down to. But yeah, not as you know it, Captain, that would be really interesting to see something implode into a void. But see, the atmosphere itself is not a void. It is made up of all these various gases and stuff. So I think basically what's happened is the glass might be returning back to some sort of level where it's turned into such fine molecules it becomes more of a gaseous situation, and that's dissipated into the atmospheric gases. But anyway, it'd be cool to see. Yeah, that's probably something. I'm going to continue on with this now because that's the point of
a gradient because gravity exists. There's a lot of atmosphere right near the ground, and then as you rise, because fewer and fewer molecules will have enough kinetic energy to go so high, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner until there's none left. Then you're in space. It's that simple. Number 5.
Okay.
One of your favorite little guys.
We just had an explanation. When you get higher and higher until there's nothing, then you're in space. Well, as I said, all these different speeds that you're claiming that we're hurtling through space, these are real and actual speeds that have to be taken into account. You can't just hand wave them away and just say, well, it's all relative, and when there's no friction, it doesn't matter. These speeds matter. I'm going to make t-shirts. Speed matters. Because speed is 100% necessary to make the heliocentric model work. And we're talking phenomenal speeds, phenomenal. So I won't grab into them right now. I'm just going to keep going. If it will work.
Challenges, we demonstrate how water can stick to a ball spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. The implication is that water and everything else should fly off of it, like a child getting thrown from a merry-go-round. Well, it's very cute that you get overwhelmed by numbers with 4 digits in them, but in actuality, the Earth spins once per day. One time in 24 hours. Get on a merry-go-round and have someone push you one time around over 24 hours. Not a very thrilling ride, is it? The issue is that the Earth is really, really big. So if instead of using rotational velocity to describe a rotating body, like a normal person, you try to use linear tangential velocity, you're going to get a pretty big number. But to be honest, it's still not really that big. planes go more than
Okay, let's just stop him there, because here is where he's talking out of his ass again, as usual. And I love when people talk like that and bring it down to RPM, because we're talking about on your merry-go-round, pushed around once per day. Do it at the scale of your really, really big Earth. Your merry-go-round has a radius, or a diameter from one side to the other, 8,000 miles, 4,000 from the center to any point around the outside rim. So if that's traveling at just once per day at that length, that is where you get the surface speed of the Earth at the equator of 1,040 miles per hour, 1.35 times the speed of sound. Speed of sound is 767 miles per hour. That's where I think the 767 jumbo jet got its name from at one stage, perhaps. Anyway, so you're talking 3/4 the length of the way down at 767. That is where the Earth is breaking the sound barrier, a good 300 miles or whatever it is. Hang on, what are we talking? 767 from 1,040. No, I'm getting it all wrong now. Anyway, if it's 4,000 miles long, traveling once per day, that is the surface speed of the outside edge. Imagine being on a rope 4,000 miles long and you're able to hold onto it, or you're tied onto it and you're going that speed. That is twice the speed of this aeroplane jet that you were talking about, going 500 miles per hour. This is why speed matters. It is a real and necessary thing to take into account. What happened there, Sean? You made a playlist for Flat Earth Aussie Jesus and YouTube deleted it. Wow. That's no good, man. Bread from stones, find apple. Sounds like it might be interesting. Anyway, the point is, when he's trying to say compare the Earth to the merry-go-round, yeah, we know the merry-go-round goes around multiple times a minute. So RPM is applicable to that. And you find multiple videos are actually quite hilarious and painful to watch, actually, when they get these kids onto them, put their heads down and get a motorbike up against the side and start accelerating them, because eventually one of them gets flung back and he can't bring himself back down because of the centripetal force. Or is it centrifugal force? Not sure which one applies there. I think it's centripetal and while you're contained, and once you're outside, it's centrifugal. Either way, the force is so strong and powerful that you cannot get back in, and usually gets badly injured, getting flung out, hits the motorbike or something or other. So, but we're not talking about something the size of several meters. When we're talking about something 4,000 miles circumference, radius, 25,000 miles circumference, 8,000 miles diameter. When it is spinning once per day, that's where we get the 1,040 mile per hour surface speed from at the equator. Allegedly, then, of course, if you're on the ball getting further and further towards the poles, it gets incrementally slower and slower. But then, because the globe is so magic, on a perfectly still day where there's no wind, all that air is moving with you at that speed, but it is moving incrementally faster and faster the higher up it is, just to create that illusion, just for you, for it to appear perfectly still. Globe, spinning globe Earth magic. Yeah, that's why I wrote a song about it. That's on that channel too. Tig Loken 16 drops in and says, what would it take for you to believe the Earth is a sphere? Proof, evidence, something that would show our surface could be spinning at 1,040 miles per hour, but sound just moves as though it doesn't, that the atmosphere magically keeps up with it, that we're hurtling through space. You know, all those things, mate. It's the mind boggles that people actually believed it in the first place. If nobody ever told us we lived on a globe, you know, if the globe had never existed in human history up until this point, and people came along that said, we're scientists and we declare that we live on a spinning ball hurtling through a vacuum of space, going 1.35 times the speed of sound, hurtling around the sun, Mach 86, which means that part of the surface is going backwards relative to that. So part of Sunny going Mach 84, and the other side's going Mach 88. Being that many times the speed of sound. So we're constantly accelerating and decelerating the whole time because of the spinning ball nonsense orbiting around the sun. As the sun is shooting through space at 514,000 miles per hour, you would look at that person and say, you're insane. That's what the flat earth is all about. We're bringing sanity back to reality to say that you cannot believe bullshit. You cannot believe severely retarded nonsense, reject the facts, and still believe them. That's what it would take. I'll just read a couple of comments here. Michael, yeah, fight the flat earth kids. Craig was upset because I told him hip hop hippie won the debate. Yeah, I don't think anybody really wins these debates. I think all we're really doing is having a discussion and discussing various beliefs, and the most logical belief technically should be accepted by the majority, viewing it as being the winner. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Most people are so indoctrinated in their spinning ball earth magic belief that they just reject it outright. They won't listen. They can't listen. It's too much for them. The cognitive dissonance is blocking their ears up, and they're going, la, 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 la. Don't tell me truth. I just want to believe we live on a spinning ball because everybody else believes it and it's popular, and I feel good when I'm part of a group that believes everything everybody else believes in. Whereas flat earthers don't really give a fuck. We'll believe whatever makes the most sense. If it's the truth, it's the truth. I don't care if it's popular or not. Gandhi said the truth is still the truth, even if a minority of one believes in it. Well, even if a minority of zero believe in it, it's still the truth. We just haven't gotten to it yet. So being popular and being right have never really gone hand in hand with one another. That's just the way the world's always been. The mob rule is often the most incorrect rule. So Tig Loken 16 is saying, because I like a bit of controversy here. You're stalking Tig. This is interesting now. Sometimes the comments can get more interesting than what I'm actually doing. So smart scientists are really just dumb and delusional then? Well, no, they're not actually. They're quite intelligent people, but what they're good at doing is remembering facts that they've learned from other people who've gone before them and then repeating those facts. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's true just because it's believed to be a fact. It's just one fact piled upon another, and then you reach this point where we think we're on a spinning ball, and how does that work? Well, we have gravity. But they don't know what gravity is. They say they have this attraction of mass, but when you ask us what it is, well, we don't know. And they don't know, but they'll still go on believing it as though it's a religious, scientific belief. And that isn't really science at all. That is just repeating something somebody else has said and then working with that to try and keep the lie alive. That's really all it's doing. It's keeping a lie alive. Now that we know, we can see much further than we should be able to see. We know that water seeks and finds its level. We know how convergence works. We know how vacuums work. We know how water behaves inside a vacuum. We know how an atmosphere would behave inside a vacuum. Then you can throw out the nonsense theories, no longer required, no longer even worth thinking about. They're insane. So these top scientists, they're not stupid people. They're just heavily indoctrinated into their beliefs and believe it so strongly that they will repeat it in all good faith. They genuinely believe it. It's the same as governments. The governments aren't in on any great conspiracy to try and hide anything from us either. They're just repeating the same shit they were told as children and grew up with and believing, and it means nothing to them. In fact, they're the ones that get brainwashed by these big companies, like what would you call it? A branch of the military. That's what NASA is. It's a branch of the military which has hijacked the beliefs of the minds that they've indoctrinated an entire nation into shedding out billions of dollars a year into promoting these fantasies that we will someday reach Mars and that we've been to the moon, where we know that this is all just absolute nonsense. But it's very profitable, and hey, it employs a lot of people. I'd be keeping the lie going too. Hey, if I was getting $52 million a day, I'd be keeping the lie alive as much as I possibly could and training more and more trained monkeys to believe in the stuff that they genuinely believe in too. They genuinely believe that they're sending satellites up into orbit. But when you think about orbit, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. If the Earth is going all these multiple speeds, how can something be in free fall around it in a frictionless environment, all held there by magical gravity? First of all, that's just not what gravity does. Everything we see gravity do means attraction to the center and sticks. So a satellite, being a physical thing, cannot be in free fall and attracted and somehow repulsed at the same time, because that's the other thing that's going on, is this repulsion. The Earth doing the 66,600 miles per hour speed, that is the one that most globers just hand wave away and say, oh, it's just all relative. But that means at times something orbiting it is in front of that speed, at other times behind that speed. And if you try and orbit a moving object, you have to be accelerating and decelerating the entire time in order to stay a constant distance from it. There's only two things that could really happen. One, you come smashing down. Two, you go flying off. Orbital mechanics is a load of nonsense. So, with that said, I'm going to get back to this
that speed.
moron.
And sitting on a plane at cruising altitude with no turbulence is just like sitting on a chair on the ground. Flat Earth priests cite these big velocities associated with the Earth and the solar system purely for shock value, and you're falling for it. Stop doing that. Furthermore, this little water doesn't stick to a ball challenge is the strawiest straw man that was ever made of straw. The Earth is huge. It generates an enormous gravitational field. That's why everything sticks to it. A ball is very tiny. It does not generate an enormous gravitational field, so things don't stick to it. Also, unless you're doing this in space, the ball must be very close to the Earth, which, as we just said, generates an enormous gravitational field. So when water drips off the ball onto the ground, your desired demonstration of gravity...
But you just showed it flying off due to the centrifugal force pushing the water outwards. That's how the spin dryer even works. By spinning it, it pushes the water outwards. So spinning the Earth, probably why the water stays on the surface, say, and doesn't sink into it like a sponge. Then again, you say it's also full of molten metals and stuff when you looked at that. Did you see that one at the start? It didn't show very well, but he showed a picture of the Earth all the way to its core, showing all these molten metals and different things, which we also know that metal, once it reaches the point of being molten, loses its magnetic forces as well. You can even do that with a magnet. Watch it as you have a ball attached to it or something and hit it with a blowtorch. And as the magnet gets hotter and hotter and hotter, eventually the ball just drops off it. Take the blowtorch off it, the magnet cools down, the ball jumps back up and sticks to the magnet again. So magnetism doesn't even work at these massive boiling temperatures. So the very concept, I know that is an RPM thing, I'll grant you that, but I'm just going to keep going. Because it's not even a thing.
Because gravity exists. Stop asking for ridiculous and impossible demonstrations like having to build an Earth-sized object to show you how water sticks to something as big as the Earth. Number 6. Lots of you say that moonlight is cold. This is astonishing for a number of reasons. The first is that it is not related to any claim you could possibly be making in order to argue for a flat Earth. But the second and much more important detail is that it is the perfect demonstration of the fact that you have no clue how science works. Some flat Earth priest measured the temperature under the moonlight and then again under something providing shade. Wow, moonlight makes it colder. But does it? Shouldn't you add some element of control to your experiment? What's a control, you ask? Fair question. You see, your measurement isn't evidence of anything. You now have to repeat the experiment when there is no moonlight to make sure that the moonlight was indeed the cause of the discrepancy in temperature.
I've gone over this one multiple times in the past.
This is something you should have learned in middle school, but don't worry, I'll finish the experiment for you. Take the measurements again on a night with a new moon so that there is no moonlight. Look at that. You'll get the same result. So the moonlight absolutely wasn't the reason for the discrepancy in temperature. What was the reason? Well, that thing that is providing the shade from the moonlight is also trapping in heat that is emanating from the Earth while it faces away from the sun. So, case closed.
Always interesting to hear another person have a take on that. He's actually wrong, because that's not how you do a control at all. The control is to do something, the same material, one that's shaded from the moonlight without being covered by a canopy that would trap the heat in the first place. So by doing it under an umbrella like that, maybe it does trap heat, maybe it doesn't. I wouldn't know. I haven't actually measured that myself. And then he also says a night under a full moon, which by definition, the moon phases work, because as the moon rises 50 minutes later every day, it becomes more and more present near the sun. So there is no such thing as a night of a new moon. It's actually the moon is on the other side of where your night is, where the sun is. That's how we just had a solar eclipse, actually. So it's a pretty silly thing to say. The only way you can actually do experiments to measure moonlight temperature is by doing it under moonlight and comparing it to something not under moonlight. And personally, I agree that it creates a cooling effect, but I disagree with most other flat earthers when it comes to that one, in that it's a cooling light. I believe it is reflected sunlight, but for the same reason, say, well, you see a very distant mountain, and because it's so high, you still see it lit by the sun after the sun has set for you. Do you expect to feel heat off that mountain? Why would you expect to feel heat off the moon? You actually don't. But light itself creates a slight acceleration of the cooling of something that's happening when the sun's no longer around to warm the air. Hence, everything is cooling down naturally. Moonlight actually accelerates the cooling effect. Hence why people erroneously believe it is a cooling light. It's a mistake made all around, but it does have a cooling effect. So I think we'll put that one to rest. And I think reflected sunlight is the only explanation for the moon, because the moon is up sufficiently high that for it, the sun never sets. The mountain might have been up high enough that for it, the sun hadn't set at the time, while it has for you down on your very low place. You see shadows of craters. I think that's the only explanation for why the moon is illuminated at all. And during the full phase, I believe it's being lit in such a way that the whole thing glows like a lamp. And that's why there are no shadows in any craters whatsoever. But it could also be an exposure issue, because the whole sky is dark at the time. None of the noble gases are glowing locally. And so exposure of our eyes and the camera, therefore, then adjust to allow more light in. And that's why it can appear a lot brighter than it actually is too. So there's multiple variables when it comes as to how the moon can and does or should appear. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, 100% lit by the sun, and until somebody can actually prove otherwise, that it produces its own light, and why the phases match exactly. If you hold a ball up in front of the moon in daytime, it's got the exact same phase created by the sun. I think it's pretty straightforward that the moon is lit by the sun.
To at least one empirical demonstration of this fact in the description below. See how important it is to know how to do a science experiment? Maybe you should actually learn science rather than just repeating what you hear on flat earth videos. Number 7. Many of you say some unintelligible nonsense about water flowing uphill, or that on the globe model some rivers flow uphill. This one is so stupid that I genuinely can't believe any human could fall for it. You'll look at a globe and say that a river flows this way and that this is somehow uphill, because you seem to think that up on the screen is some kind of universal up in space. Well, how about if I turn this a little bit? What do you know? Now it's down. Listen up. There is no up and down in space. This is not up. This is not down.
Oh, grant you, he's got a point there, and I'm not going to argue with that one at all. In fact, I hadn't looked this far through the video before. I'm just doing all this off the cuff now, because I agree that up and down on maps does not apply. So a river flowing north, for example, is not flowing uphill. But what it's doing is it's following the contour of the land above the sea level. So rivers can flow in absolutely any direction. But on a globe, technically, as he just pointed out, when he tilted it, then it's flowing down. So at some point, it actually technically has to be flowing uphill to even flow. It's on the flat planar Earth, that's not a problem. Everything is just seeking its level because land is higher, water is lower, and water is seeking to be lower. That's why it flows. That's why rivers flow. That's why lakes with contained edges don't flow, because they're contained. That's why oceans, therefore, have to meet the same conditions of a lake or a pond or a bathtub or your tub or a glass or any sort of thing that holds water without having it flowing away. All the edges have to be higher by definition. So that means the oceans are not immune to the natural properties of water. Unless you've got deluded beliefs and you believe gravity can do magical things to it. Wow.
To believe so would be as dumb as thinking that on Earth, whichever way you happen to be facing is north. No one on Earth is upside down or on their side. Up on Earth is away from the surface of the Earth, no matter where you are on the Earth. Rivers flow from higher elevation to lower elevation, which is a measure of how far away you are from the surface of the Earth. This has nothing to do with flowing in any particular direction along the surface.
Yeah, he's got a good point,
also why
and it
people
works.
make videos acting confused about why elevation doesn't change between various sea level locations around the world are among the dumbest people alive. This is sea level. This is sea level. This is above sea level. This is above sea level. That's what elevation means. Learn the definitions of words before you try to use them in a sentence. Number 8. Many flat earthers remain dumbfounded by the idea that the Earth is slightly closer to the sun in winter than in summer. As I've said before, winter up north is summer down south and vice versa. So your confusion is one of northern hemisphere narcissism, but it is also one of complete ignorance. Here's the Earth. Here's the light coming from the sun. Look at this portion. It hits the Earth straight on. Look at this portion. Because of the curvature of the Earth, the light hits the surface at an angle and is therefore distributed around a greater area. Same amount of heat distributed around a larger area, lower average temperature. This is absolutely trivial to understand.
This is stuff I've debunked
magnifying glasses
100
can
times
focus
before.
light to a point and set things on fire. It's how heat works. Flat Earth priests know this. They just pretend to be confused about things that they know their viewers won't check up on.
Well, no. Basically,
let's
before you go to number 9, come on, give me a second here. Basically, if you understand the model, then it all makes perfect sense. The sun is actually higher when the northern side is in its summer. That's just how it works. It spirals around and around the equator, and as it gets higher up until the point of June 22nd, by getting further away from us, it appears to go in smaller and smaller circles. Hence, the direct light from it will reach more towards the northern center. As it spirals back down, it appears to move southwards, outwards, and that's why then the south then gets into its summer. So it's very, very straightforward if you understand the model. And what these globeheads aren't quite getting is that they are thinking that somehow the sun is moving inwards towards the northern center and going in slower and slower circles. But that's only what happens as the appearance of the sun, whereas the actual sun is much, much higher, but we're down low looking up at it through the atmosphere, and so that's what's creating that appearance of moving in a smaller circle while still going the exact same size circle around the exact same size equator at the exact same speed all year round. So it is a little hard one to grasp at first, but hopefully the more times I repeat the way this works for the globeheads and for many flat earthers too, I still have trouble understanding it, is that the sun itself can be really, really high, but because it only makes its apparition at this level of the actual atmosphere, wherever we are on the plane looking up through that part of the atmosphere, that's where we see that apparition of the sun. That's why it can appear to be in multiple places, like 2 parts in the south, like South America and South Africa, for example, might be in daylight at the same time, because the sun is actually, once nearer to us, creating the same apparition for people in completely different places. That's how you get more than 12 hours of daylight anywhere on the Earth. On a tilted ball, pretty much everywhere should be getting no more than 12 hours of daylight every day. It really wouldn't make that much of a difference if you're facing the sun half the time and facing away from it the other half. That little tilt doesn't actually give you a very accurate seasonal clock for the amount of daylight hours places receive. Now, I know it does work because that was just one way of analysing the information. But when you analyse it with truth and honesty and integrity, after ruling out all the nonsensical beliefs about the spinning ball, then the sun becomes quite easy to understand, and why we get the amount of daylight we get as we do, because we're looking at the apparition of the sun, while the real sun is somewhere completely different. But because of its height, we can see it from further away. It's a tricky one. Unless the globe spins in different directions from the equator. Yeah, well, yeah, there is no globe. So I think the best way to try and understand flat Earth is to just forget everything about the globe and try and understand reality, because it's really, really hard to do when you've got two conflicting beliefs happening at once. On the one hand, you believe you're on a spinning ball, and that's what creates the sunrise and sunset every day, but somehow the stars don't do that. They just go around in circles above you anyway for reasons, and Polaris always remains fixed for other reasons, and the constellations never change because the stars are just moving exactly so, just for your insignificant tiny little space rock spinning through the galaxy at billions of miles a year. But all the other stars will just behave just so the constellations never ever change. No stellar parallax ever occurs. It's all just for reasons working just for your spinning ball, whereas when you think about being on the fixed plane and all the stars are just doing what they're doing as one body, it all becomes so much more simple and logical, so easy to understand, that all this nonsense and spin suddenly gives you a moment of peace and sanity. You can step outside and say, oh, I'm not on the outside surface of the spinning ball hurtling through the galaxy with a chance of being hit by an asteroid at any moment. It's actually really quite peaceful and beautiful. And it's an amazing place to be and live. And once you grasp that bit of sanity, then you have to cop all the nonsense from all these globe believers who have been indoctrinated for generations, for hundreds of years, to believe they live on the outside surface of a spinning space rock hurtling through space, covered with 71% curving water. Makes no sense. I'm going to move on. What's the next one?
Earthers refer to the body of scientific knowledge as scientism. This is meant to be derogatory, implying that science is a religion. I'm very sorry, but saying this just demonstrates that you know nothing about science and probably didn't pass a single science class in high school. Science students are not told what to believe. They are shown how to perform experiments. Even in high school physics, students use blocks and ramps and balls and pendulums and carts and rulers and timers to derive Newton's laws and many other such pillars of science. They personally do the science that has already been done by others in order to derive the knowledge that we already know and prove its validity to themselves. This continues through college and then on into graduate school, where students do their own research and figure out things that no one else has done yet. So using the word scientism only serves to disqualify you from adult conversation regarding science.
Well, that's a fair point.
It is quite clear why you adopt this viewpoint, because you just accept whatever you hear if it's what you want to believe. This is why your beliefs are baseless. Since you are incapable of doing anything other than repeating what you are told, you assume that others are doing the same thing, but they are not. Those that are educated in the sciences understand how things work and use this information to build technology.
Okay. That's enough waffle from you for a moment, mate. I agree. Yeah, my grandfather was a science teacher. In fact, my grandmother was as well. She was also a maths and English teacher. My mother's a pharmacist, which is basically a chemist, a scientist. I come from a science background of highly educated, highly intelligent people. And as a child, my basic greatest want was, I'm going to be a scientist. That was me as a child. That was my dream. I'm going to be a scientist. That's what I fully believe. But what I've discovered as I went through the educational process is they're not really teaching you anything at all. They're really just dumbing you down more and more. They're dragging everything out. The teachers are all getting their paychecks. You've got to turn up to school every day. The bus driver's getting paid to drive his bus. We're not going anywhere. We're actually getting dumber and dumber. And I thought that going to the US would be a step in the right direction of advancing knowledge, thinking, well, that's the leading sort of authority on knowledge at this stage. The US, they sent men to the moon. That should be the place to go. So I went as an exchange student when I was 16, spent a year over in the US, and I found that their education standard is ridiculously low. It is well below ours. I was doing year 11 standard here in Australia. The stuff I got sent over to do in their equivalent of year 11, which they actually call you junior. Here, year 11 is a senior. Years 11 and 12 are senior, but the US system, they still call you a junior at that level. And they were teaching the same sort of shit that I was learning back in year 9 here in Australia. It was just a joke, the educational standards. The stuff they're teaching the kids at college wasn't even on par with what we're learning in year 11 and 12 here in Australia. You have to go on and do like a higher degree over there to even get the same equivalent of high school education here in Australia. So it sort of broke my heart in a sense, but it also opened up my eyes as to realising what the whole education system is all about. And the more and more you learn, you do have to look into all your different conspiracies and so forth. There's some really good ones on YouTube. If you look up the big oil conspiracy, that basically goes into the whole thing about education and the pharmaceutical industry and oil, of course, and of course banning cannabis from us, is that they just want people smart enough to operate the machinery and turn up and do their jobs. They don't want people thinking for themselves. That is why now the flat earth movement is so frowned upon, because we are thinking for ourselves. We're seeing through all their lies, and we're realizing what a joke it all is. We're basically getting treated as criminals, outsiders, whereas in reality, we're the ones, we are the leading scientists of the current moment. The people who are thinking outside the box and questioning things, that is science. That is true science, is actually questioning, proving something for yourself. Don't just believe what somebody else tells you because they told you that's what it is and accept that. That's what he was basically just ranting and raving on about, is going on and testing things for yourself. But the problem is, these people are doing it inside classrooms, inside educational institutions, with textbooks and equipment and stuff. They're not actually going out into the real world and testing their beliefs, which is, even astrophysicists, they'll spend more time in a freaking stellarium than they will actually outside looking at reality. This is the problem. When you open up your eyes and you look outside and then you start to understand the way convergence works, the reason why boats appear to disappear behind curvature. I mean, this is something, I think his name's, I'm really good with names. Alex, somebody, he's got his thing. It's a $10,000 challenge anyway. But he wants to do it based on his examples of testing something ballistic. So I say, no, let's just do an example where you go to a jetty at the ocean, and Byron Bay is actually a perfect place to do this, because the boat jetty is up at Brunswick Heads, which is a good, I would say, at least 20, 24 kilometres away or something like that. And Cape Byron, being the easternmost point, juts right out. So it's like a giant big bay. So what you can do is you can get somebody at the river mouth at Brunswick Heads taking a boat straight out to sea and watching it disappear over the curvature. Now, you can have somebody up at the lighthouse at Byron Bay standing 90 degrees on, watching it and saying, having the two things being filmed at the same time, and say, well, now you've seen the boat go over the curvature. I am seeing the boat going directly across a perfectly flat level line with not a hint of curvature whatsoever. It is somewhere where you can stand 90 degrees on and prove for a fact it is not curvature that is causing the boat to be hidden. It's just the distance. People just can't see. Sean Becker, don't tell me that, really. I'm having a laugh now at that comment. Yes, I'm a self-taught horticulturist, botanist, mycologist, organic chemist that made all my own cures instead of pharmaceutical band-aids for 23 years before I had a heart attack and became physically disabled. Spongerix. Yeah, well, I guess a heart attack might do that to you. You know, there's such a thing as too much of a good thing too. I think that's one of the unfortunate side effects of being your own self-taught horticulturist, botanist, mycologist, and organic chemist, that making all your own cures is maybe you didn't really need cures as such. Maybe you just needed little micro doses to keep the body curing itself, keep the body in good health and condition, and hopefully you won't have a heart attack. But yeah, sorry to hear that, mate. Been computing since you were 8 and had internet in 1993. That's awesome, man. I was right into computers when I was a kid too, I have to say, because all we had was a VIC-20. We were the Commodore VIC-20 generation, and my best mate, well, a good mate, I should say, a neighbour who I got to hang out with quite a lot, he had the Commodore 64, and I was so jealous because we didn't get the Commodore 64. It came out the year later, and of course, we weren't rich enough to upgrade. So I was stuck with the VIC-20, and I programmed the shit out of that thing. You know, I used every last little bit and byte of memory and peek and poke and all the different basic sort of stuff. But then I moved to the coast when I was 13, and I got into surfing instead, and barely even looked back at computers. We got an Apple IIe sometime down the track, which I just used to play games on. That was about it. So, unfortunately, yeah, life takes various twists and turns, and we could always say, yeah, I could have done this, could have done that. Yeah, today I'd be a computer whiz had I followed down that path. But then again, I wouldn't have become the person I've become by getting in touch with nature and spending time out in nature, around the ocean, observing reality, observing the full moon rising nearly every month, observing the tides all the time, having awesome swims, sitting around trees, climbing trees, sitting with deadly snakes, doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things that have me attuned in a different way that the average person just doesn't get that ability, especially not when they consider their level of intelligence is coming from a classroom, from being able to do experiments which are just basically mechanical, chemical, physical type of things. There is another world of knowledge available for us to tap into when we tune into nature itself. And that is what is sadly missing from today's academic world. They believe that science is this classroom, cold, hard knowledge, not this intuitive feeling that you can get, you can tap into and become something more, plus all the science as well. You know, that's still important, don't get me wrong. But when we say scientism, for as he's referring to it there, he's talking about people who dogmatically believe what they're told based on things that they don't really test for themselves. Like, for example, gravity. We ask the greatest physicists of the world today, what is gravity? Well, we don't know. And it's like, well, that's good that you admit it, but to still then believe it as an invisible force due to the attraction of mass technically makes you a liar. And there's no truth in that. We have to get to the very nitty-gritty of truth to believe only in things which we can prove. And if you can't prove it, well, okay, then the next thing is you hypothesize, you intuit it. And then you realize, does that fit the model? And if you intuit it correctly, if you interpret it correctly, I meant to be saying, then you're getting closer and closer to the truth the whole time. And that is what science should be all about. Not repeating stuff that you were told by people from 300 years ago, from 500 years ago, from 2,500 years ago. We've known the Earth's a globe for thousands of years. We don't have to question it. This is the common argument you will hear from nearly every globehead. We don't have to question it. We've known for thousands of years. But what else in science has stood the test of time for thousands of years? Yeah, we nearly got the Atari, but we got the Big 20 instead. Yeah, happy days. Anyway, one more
such as
piece to listen
computers
to.
and the internet, both of which you use to claim that the science that produced them isn't real, in a display of irony so thick that you could cut it with a knife.
A bit too big.
And to wrap things up, number 10.
Number 10, here we go.
Pièce de résistance. The claim that we have all been indoctrinated, that we have been brainwashed by schools, by the government, by NASA, by Freemasons, by Hollywood. Take your pick. Well, as I have demonstrated in this clip, you all say the same exact ridiculous things word for word, like you're reciting the oath of the Flat Earth fraternity. So it's a rather...
Oh, it's just the same thing over and over. Or it always finds its level. I thought he might have been making an interesting cartoon there.
Silly accusation to be throwing around. The fact that you all say the same things is not surprising in the slightest. What do you do when you want to brainwash someone? You tell them they have already been brainwashed. That's what Flat Earth priests do. They tell you that you've been brainwashed so that you are nice and receptive to the brainwashing. They tell you that everything you know is a lie so that they can lie to you. It's human psychology 101. Why do they do this? Money, status. It's a way for con men to capitalize on the gullible few who exhibit a combination of ignorance and suggestibility. It's a cult. You're part of a cult. Not like the kill yourselves with Kool-Aid kind, but it's not that far off.
All right, let's just pause. Idiot there. Forget word yet. You brought that up nicely. Then there's the Dunning-Kruger. They love to drop these names too, of course, as though, because they say it, then therefore we must be stupid because we suffer this Dunning-Kruger effect because we are uneducated but think we can think above our level. So that's pretty much what they're saying with Dunning-Kruger, little realizing that every time they drop that, they are themselves the ones suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect because they believe we live on a globe. And that is the cult. It is a heliocentric cult. Heliocentrism basically turns out to be sun worship, placing the sun in the center of our solar system, all the planets going around it, is what heliocentrism basically stems from. It's an ancient form of superstitious belief to worship the sun. Now, there's nothing wrong with worshipping the sun in a sense as the giver of life, the light, everything of life that exists comes as a result of the sun. It is the powerhouse, the engine, so to speak, that drives this whole living body. But it's a duality. The duality is the Father Sun and the Mother Earth. Hence, therefore, the living children, as a result, all life is basically the children of the Father Sun and the Mother Earth. We just happen to be the ones who believe we were created in their image. And perhaps we were. Perhaps when spirit was first created and sent out to create, explore, experience and everything, perhaps that's the form spirit took, but perhaps also there's a consideration that every living thing that exists now in this real world also once existed as a spirit first, and then the spirit took on what you might say a level of consciousness that slowed it down enough so that everything is basically energy. And the more it slows down, the more solid it appears. So it goes from light to sound to solid matter. And living things are basically the combination of a number of things. You've got to have your 4 elements in them for a start. You've got to have your earth, the physical stuff. You have your water, which is the living fluid stuff. The fire, which is the spark of life. Earth, air, fire, and water. Air, of course, air is most indefinitely important. That's the gaseous exchange, the air pressure that we run off. You stop breathing for more than a couple minutes, you will die. All these things combine, earth, air, fire, and water, the 4 elements in the one thing to create the 5th element, life. So spirit, in one sense of the word, by its own thought, manifested as life itself. But what happens once it crosses that barrier between thought and physical matter, it becomes trapped in the physical plane. And hence why life keeps continuing on. It's not such a bad thing. We sort of consider it a bit of a downfall in a way that we become trapped in physicality, but at the same time, it's quite a brilliant thing too. Like whether you became the worm or the bug or the spider or the fish, the dolphin, the eagle, whatever thing that spirit manifested into, it's created its lineage. And it's, by its very nature, it has to be intelligent, it has to be forceful, it has to be able to tune in to the environment that it's in and survive and seek to survive, have the will to survive, have the will to procreate, and have the will to keep its lineage going. And that's pretty much, I think, far more important even than the idea of whether we live on a spinning ball or on a planar Earth. I think the planar Earth makes far more sense because it takes all that woo out, all that nonsense of random chance, and really wakens you up to spirit that is within each and every living thing. Every living thing is full of this life force. And when you become a part of it, to tune in with it and be one with it, it's such a beautiful feeling to be one with the Mother Earth. I can't explain it any better than that. And so with that, I might just read a few comments and finish this off. Cheers for tuning in, And let's close that one off now. I'm over and done with that guy. Sean Becker was in all the gifted classes and independent study fair in middle school. Good for you, mate. I have Christians nagging me because I lean towards Buddhism because you don't need a deity. I don't need deity. Grammar Nazi. You don't need a deity in order to know how to live. No, you don't. What you really need to do is just chill. Chill and be cool, man, and just look around at the wonderful living world around you. Yeah, I drink a fair bit of beer, I will admit that, but that helps me to chill and to be less judgmental, to just be like living in the moment. I can't express it enough how often I myself, after cleaning the pubs all night long down in Byron, would just go up to the beach, the natural beach reserve where it was permitted to be clothes optional as much as you wanted back then. Nowadays they've restricted it to a much smaller area, but still get there occasionally. But I would just go and be one with nature. Just go and walk through the wallaby tracks in the wildest scrub. Look out for the deadly snakes. Find a nice peaceful glade to get in tune just with the trees. The trees around there is quite amazing. And then to go swimming in the ocean, to bake or to lay out under the sun and expose your whole entire skin to the sun is one of the greatest health benefits you can find. People talk about sun gazing. Well, you can sun gaze through your skin as well as your eyes. When you do it with your whole entire skin, you tend not to burn as much too. One thing I noticed is once you've gotten a little bit used to it, and take some astaxanthin. Strongly recommend astaxanthin as a health supplement. It is an antioxidant made from the red algae that's about 500 times as antioxidant as vitamin E. We all know how important vitamin E is as an antioxidant. Well, this is 500 times. And it works from the inside to help prevent you from sunburning. It's also that one thing that causes pink flamingos to be pink, and why crabs have red flesh or red parts of them, why the salmon has pink flesh. It's because of this astaxanthin, most important mineral or health supplement we could possibly have. So, and wouldn't you know it, it's an algae. And as it turns out, the fountain of youth, when it gets discovered, I sort of discovered it already, but when it becomes more commonly known, it will be found to be blooming with algae. And this algae is like a superfood. It gives us all the nutrients we need. And then, because we can then bathe in the sunbathe, we get our energy directly from the sun. You don't really need to eat so much either. Eating just becomes a cleansing thing. It all comes back full balance. The more you get into connecting with nature, the more logical everything becomes. The more you sort of can tune into listening to the birds, and you listen to the birds singing, and you feel the trees responding. It is said that bird song is what causes the trees to grow, and that's why in the morning you get the dawn chorus of all the birds singing as the sun returns. That's when all the plants reawaken again to capture sunlight. Well, in a sense, we can do the same with our skin, with our eyes, with the hair, but you can't do it with an unclean body. That is the problem. This is why, we're now going a little bit off track here now, but this is why if you read the Essene Gospel of Peace, the way that Jesus taught people how to be healed from disease was by fasting, and he would say after he's healed somebody, go and sin no more. That didn't just mean, stop stealing or murdering or whatever. It means stop defiling the temple of your body with the flesh of dead animals, is what it basically boils down to. The one law of nature is thou shalt not kill. So when you are killing an animal to survive, as a matter of survival, it's acceptable. As a matter of doing it just because it tastes good and you've got plenty of alternatives, it becomes a sin. That's the difference between sin. It's all in the intent. And when you sin, you're creating disharmony, which is disease, which is therefore why you will get sunburnt if you go and lay out in the sun, if your body is in a state of dis-ease. But if you have cleansed it and you don't have to expel all these nasty toxins, and you've been paying attention to the correct nutrients that our bodies actually really need to survive and thrive upon, then you can lay out for hours in the sun without burning, gaining energy from it, and gaining knowledge and wisdom from everything around you. The very wind. Now, there is a song. The answer is blowing in the wind. It literally is blowing in the wind, because that's where it's always been. The answers are all in the wind, in nature, in the sound of the ocean, in the sound of the grass growing, billowing in the breeze. It's all there. Sometimes you might need magic mushrooms, I guess, but yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go now and see what else I can get up to. I'll catch up with you later. Hey, take care, and thanks for joining in. And I can't even get down to the end stream button because there it is.